Retooling for the Future with Heather Downing.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. This podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient and able to deliver world-class results. They are hiring, by the way, architects as well as .NET engineers who'd like a path to become an architect. So you can go to clearmeasure.com/careers for that. Our guest today on the show is a return guest, Heather Downing, and she is a passionate coder and entrepreneur. She has experience working with Fortune 500 companies, building enterprise-level voice, mobile, and C# .NET applications. She focuses on external thought leadership, encouraging fellow programmers to present on topics outside of the office and in the community. And she's also an international technical speaker. By the way, recently speaking at the Norwegian Developers Conference, NDC, and an early adopter of technology. She's also a conference organizer at KCDC, the Kansas City Developers Conference, and is just involved in tons of community stuff. You can find her website at Coraline.com. We will include a link in the show notes. Heather, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Yeah. If we go back to mid-2020, you were on the show last. And so it's been a while. For those who did not, and I encourage anybody to go back and just look up her previous interview on the show. But for those who maybe haven't seen you speak or haven't heard you on the podcast, just tell us a little bit about what's been going on lately, and also what are the key aspects in your career that led you up to what you're working on today?
Oh, those are two big questions. Yeah. Yeah. So, my goodness. Well, I have been spending a lot of time figuring out the way that we learn. And part of that is deep diving a little more into what my local community was doing in Kansas City in our meetups, and of course our big conference that we talked about, and learning how different generations are discovering content. Even Scott Hanselman now is doing shorter form, different tidbits of learning, not just on YouTube, but it looks like some of them are moving to TikTok as well. And realizing that we really have multi-generational community now. It isn't just one or two groups. It's like 4 different groups of people that completely learn differently. So that has been what I've spent the whole last year kind of looking into more, and how to usher in the next passionate group of developers. And it doesn't matter their age. It's more about how they learn and how they consume that content. Nice.
Well, you mentioned different generations. Talked on other shows about just some of the statistics that I've seen. I don't know if you've seen any more recent ones that show that over the last 7 years, the number of programmers has doubled in the industry. Have you looked more deeply into those?
I haven't, but I can tell you this. A lot of them are not in North America. And I'm learning that the more straightforward we can be with how we teach code, the better, because often English is not the first language. And so sometimes blog posts can be structured in a way that is set up for the hubris of North American or European flair, I should say. But sometimes it's not completely understood that that's a joke, or that it's you are insinuating something. So instead of
the sarcasm.
Oh, absolutely. It isn't always clear as to what you mean. And so I've discovered that it's best to be as straightforward as possible. You don't need to be dry, but definitely state your case up front and wrap it up in the end. But state your case up front with your why right away. And so that they know that what they're reading really is going to answer their question. I find often I get questions for, I went 2/3 of the way through this tutorial, and it turns out it's not at all what I really needed. And that's just with people who are in North America. Can you imagine how it must be for someone struggling in another place? And that is what I've discovered, is that there's so many more people and from different cultures and backgrounds, that I think if we're not accommodating, we're going to not be able to replace ourselves. And that is the goal, by the way, is to replace you so that you can go and do bigger things, or you can do other things, because there's nothing worse than not being able to have a pipeline of people that can help hold up the infrastructure of our countries, of our companies, and that has been a big focus for me because I'm in developer relations.
That is a good point. Replace ourselves. Unfortunately, see your perspective. There's so many software systems where new people come in, the old people leave, and then like clockwork, the new people say, "We're going to have to rewrite this." Have you seen that as well?
Of course. The reality is this, though: if something's working, there's no way that the company is going to spend the money to change it if it's working. If it's not working, then of course. But because that way it affects their bottom line, or worse, it could endanger lives. Some interesting statistics I've started learning is the kinds of people that work on software systems that you probably don't think of traditionally. So let's say healthcare is pretty common, right? Healthcare is one, but what if you were working on air traffic control software? So that means that something that you are working on, it impacts the lives of people that are inside of a plane and on the ground landing. So if something works really well, it's going to be really a hard sell to say, hey, let's just update this to React.
Right.
It's not going to be embraced because there's a larger danger there of just taking whatever is new. However, that means that if you're not documenting what you're doing, then you're shooting everybody in the foot. Because the whole reason that somebody who comes in says, oh, we need to rewrite this, is because they don't understand what you just did, what you coded. There is no other real reason. Once in a while, you get someone who doesn't have an ego, who realizes that, 4 years ago, I wrote this API and it's not really secure. So I do think it needs work. But most of us are not like that. Most of us are very proud of the work that we do because we did the best we could at the time with the resources at hand. Revisiting is kind of like this thing that we have closely tied our identity to, right? And it feels weird to go back to your boss 4 years later saying, hey, I think we have technical debt now and we need to tackle that. But that is something that probably needs to shift. It's a slow shift. But in the meantime, I think documentation will go a long way. And it's not fun. It's super boring. It's not the same as being able to create something out of nothing that does something magical. But it is so important that I feel like every developer needs to just kind of sit down and find their favorite documentation that they've learned from and see if they can at least mimic that. Like, let's say you like Stripe's documentation. Why don't you just start suggesting that you write your stuff like that? I've never had a team come back and say, no, we don't want you to document something. I've never heard that before. It's possible, but just try suggesting it, because that's another thing you can be proud of and maybe set the standard for, so that it isn't so confusing when you get those new developers coming in.
Well, tell us about that. You said Stripe's documentation.
Oh, yeah. I think they have.
What is that?
Stripe? So Stripe is a payment gateway API.
Oh, okay. The service, the merchant service.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. I was thinking that there was this new documentation method that I hadn't heard about.
No, remember, all just like fashion, everything old is new again when it comes to methods and software.
Gotcha.
There's many things that are making its rounds again under new labels. I just found that they had the best approach. I think Twilio is a close second with some of their documentation. It's just really, really good, very interactive, and you can do things within their browser and their instance. .NET's come a long way for that as well. I don't think it's there all the way yet. It's still a little confusing for people coming, especially from front end. But I think we're getting there. Nice.
Well, you mentioned so many people coming into the industry, different generations. When you speak at the various groups, what do you find resonates?
resonates with each group or overall?
Let's take the younger generation, because that's where the huge growth numbers are.
Well, you got to pick a number. What is young to you?
Hey, good point.
I feel young, but I'm 38. So,
yeah. You're practically a kid.
Except there are people who left high school to develop, and they are 20 years younger. So just keep in mind that they grew up in a different time. I remember, and you probably also remember, having a childhood without having the internet to answer our questions.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so that's why I'm still so tickled about it all. Every time I look things up, that this is still possible. But they grew up having it all the time. Right. So they're faster at discovering the information, which is really good. But knowing when they should apply that information is very different. So I find that getting into the details of how you do something is useful, but it probably already exists somewhere. The biggest thing I've seen that really makes impact is telling them why they would do that. And the approach. There isn't a whole lot of explanations about methodology, and that it is a choice. Methodology is a choice. It's not a dictatorship. I started out learning more of a waterfall, moved into Agile, and I don't know what we're doing now. It seems like sometimes you're doing mob programming, sometimes you're doing this. That is not your entire world of software. You can do things on your own and have none of that methodology stuff at all. But then the question is, how do you organize your work? How do you organize your thoughts and what you're going to be doing? That's what Agile tries to solve, right? Is that we are ever changing, and we need to agree every couple of weeks that we're going to kind of shift it a little bit in a different direction. Sometimes that works, but it probably doesn't work for a bigger company. They need more of a lead time. They need more of a waterfall approach to have the buy-in, right? And especially if you're government, man, that takes a long time to implement. So you're not going to have that kind of experience. None of that stuff is taught in school. The 60 to 80% of your job stuff that we experience is not taught in school, and it's not even taught in boot camps. So I think that what's resonating is what you can expect, but also that there is a choice, and that if you're not enjoying something, maybe you can suggest a different way instead of just quitting. But empowering them to have that voice early on is very difficult, because we have a huge hierarchy of mastery in our industry, right? So why would they ever question the master architect? That would be, you know what I mean? Is that some of the best questions have come from people who are in the beginning stages. They're really smart. I think everybody coming in just wants to help solve problems. And we should kind of see that as the great equalizer, is that we all do want to solve a problem.
Yeah.
But if you dictate how to solve that problem and there is no other way because you've thought it through, you are robbing them of logically going through that problem solving phase. So everybody should bring something to the table. And that has resonated the best in a workshop situation. No matter what their age group or experience level, that has seemed to do the best. That way they're still thinking for themselves, and they're not just taking you at your word that you've thought about whether or not you should use the MD5 algorithm. It really needs to be something that you bring the end result that we're supposed to get to, and now ask everybody to think about it and bring things to the table. That is the best way I've discovered to kind of teach and bring people along and have that buy-in, so where they're not like, oh, this sucks, I'm out.
You mentioned the universities and boot camps don't teach them what they need to know. Talk about that a little bit more, because there are probably a good number of high school or maybe early college people listening here, or maybe the listeners will end up sending it to their high school friends or friends' kids or whatnot. What do they need to know? What is the reality that you see on the university programs and boot camps that you've been exposed to?
The reality is that how to work with a team is something you have to know. This industry tends to really attract introverted people, and that's great. But at this point now, we've graduated to a point where there's too many of us. And if you don't have any sort of basic people skills, you're going to have a really hard time getting placed in the kinds of roles you want. Because you have to be able to think about how you want to solve this problem, but also communicate it. And if you can't do that, it will limit you. You can be amazing. But if nobody knows about what you're talking about because you never mention it or you never speak up, that's going to limit you. And I really wish there was a little bit more of an emphasis on the communication between not just other team members, but people who are non-technical. You have to know how to explain something in a nebulous way to someone who is not going to be typing on a keyboard with you. And sometimes those people are the ones making the yes or no decision as to whether or not you get to work on that for the next 6 months. So you can learn that early. And I hope that you do, because it's harder to learn later in life. I had to learn it later in life. And there's a great YouTube channel about that too. There's one called Charisma on Command, or Charisma University. And yes, it sounds like it's about being charismatic. It's about understanding how humans interact and what they mean versus what they say. And it's so empowering so that you can understand a little bit about how to lead a conversation in the way you need to go for your team, or even just you as a junior individual. And so highly recommend that for sure.
We'll make sure to put it in the show notes. Yeah, that's good.
I wish they gave us a sampling of, like, first it was waterfall, then it was agile, and then explain what that is, but also how to organize your thoughts. I've read a book recently called Atomic Habits by James Clear, and it has changed the way I've worked. My brain is full of lots of ideas. And so sometimes it kind of trips over itself. And I just tend to get distracted very quickly with my code. And so this has taught me different ways of putting things that don't really tax my cognitive brain very much in place. So things just happen very organically and naturally. And then I revisit it now every couple of months to see if that's really working or if I need to adjust it. And I got to tell you, if I had read that book before I started coding, I think my stress level would have gone down at least by half, because a lot of it was not knowing when to quit, when to stop, what to do. I'm sure you've heard of the Pomodoro Technique of setting a time block, right, for how long you code, and then you walk away and then you come back.
But if we mention it, we have to describe it.
That's
because there's people that haven't heard it.
Well, I'll let you describe it, since I already described a little bit about my other technique.
Oh, no, you're the guest. You're the guest.
Well, I'm not going to read the wiki page, but the Pomodoro Technique is basically you set a certain amount of time. It's usually like 20 to 25 minutes where you do a task. And then after that time, you walk away for 5 minutes and go do something else that is not related in the same way. Meaning that you can't just like say, oh, I'm done after my 25 minutes coding, I'm going to now type a letter to somebody in an email. No, that means physically get up, walk away from your desk or wherever you are and go do something physical, or walk your dog or something like that. And then come back and then go ahead and set a time frame. Time boxing has helped me so much, because if I think I just have all day to do something, I will go down rabbit holes that don't need to be gone down, instead of just getting something done. So I'm excellent at starting things. I'm terrible at follow through. And that's because I explore every single avenue on the way to get there. That's really what it is. So if I time box it and say, hey, I don't need to do anything but just like 2 methods during this coding session. Sometimes I do more, but I say, hey, and when I hit the 25 minutes, I stop and then I get up. And that has changed what it means for me to have that little dopamine release of, oh, I got something accomplished. I did something. And sometimes you'll work on complicated things, but you can still break them down into much smaller tasks. And so the Pomodoro Technique is not just for software, it's for many other kinds of work, but it has, that was like the original way that my boss taught me to work, was this technique. And now I've learned there's all sorts of other ones out there that really helps you. I've completely embraced the automated life. And I think anybody who lives by themselves and doesn't have another person kind of helping them out with life probably needs as much automation as possible. And that includes, like, I don't have time to mow my lawn. So I definitely made a deal with my neighbor. If he mows my lawn, I'll cook him brisket on the weekends. Like we figured it out. Yeah. I mean, I'm in Kansas City. We're the barbecue capital of the world. So,
hey, those are fighting words. No,
I know.
No, you probably are. I like Kansas City brisket and ribs and all that.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
You mentioned Atomic Habits by James Clear, but we'll include that in the show notes. But just give us a little hint of like what are the things that stand out? It's like, okay, typically in a whole book, not every single idea is life changing, but what were the ones where it's just really changed the way you thought about things?
Oh my gosh. There are so many. I probably should just write them down and then like put them in a series of tweets as I'm going. I had just finished it. So his concept of getting 1% better every day is so doable. Did you read this book?
I haven't, but I'm going to put it on the list.
So anything that's broken down smaller seems more digestible. And if you, instead of saying, I'm going to be this, I run into this all the time. I'm going to be this fitness person. I'm going to be climbing mountains and do this thing. But right now I'm still in like the certain like BMI category and probably really hard on my knees if I did that all right now. And so I try really hard anyway, very valiantly. And I do get some progress, but then ultimately my body isn't strong enough to get to that mountain. And it's very demoralizing. So instead, he says, if you just try to get 1% better every day from the last day, it's so small, but it was like a little tiny thing that you did, even if it was, I got up a minute earlier, or, hey, I checked one more thing. You can decide what that percentage translates to. I look at it as one more thing, and a very small thing, not a big thing, one very small thing. And for me, it was, I want to walk a little bit longer with my dog today, because every step, I get another step in my,
there you go.
Right. And that has so slowly and silently changed my fitness level. I can't even tell you, I didn't even notice it. I wasn't even breaking a sweat. And it was just very quietly getting better. It's interesting. There is I can't remember who says this line. I'll give you the quote later, but it's, you aren't guaranteed to succeed, but you are guaranteed to struggle. So struggle well and pick what you're going to struggle with that you can incrementally improve and slay. And that struggle will be, the overcoming part of that struggle will be its own reward, because you will learn how to be resilient. And if there's anything we need in software, it's to be resilient. This is oftentimes a thankless job. And only because a lot of people don't really understand what we do, or if they do, they're very competitive, right? And I don't think it needs to be that way at all. We need so many more developers than there are developers. So resiliency is really key, but also just trying a little bit more each day to be better. And sometimes what you're trying to get better at is not software coding at all. It is that missing link of communication. And that is probably the one thing you could do immediately, is to try to just get a little bit better at that part of being understood, but also listening and understanding. Sometimes we think we know better because we're more technical, and that's not necessarily the case. Just being more open to that will always lead you in better places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's taboo in some circles to even question it, but what is your take on the question, to be a programmer, is it necessary to go to schooling after high school, a university?
Define schooling. Yeah. Define
a university.
A 4-year?
Yeah. A 4-year university.
No, it's not. Now, what are you trying to do? Are you working on the rocketry components to SpaceX? It's a possibility that you may need to get a certain kind of degree in order to be let in the door. because of that, the level of table stakes are really high, right? But to get a job at Facebook, no, you don't have to have a degree. I mean, you probably will need to educate in some way, whether that is a completely self-done course, or you go to a boot camp, or you do some college. But I find, unfortunately, most of what is set up in traditional schooling, even now, it takes too long for them to turn over their curriculum. And so they're still teaching things from, at this point, 5-6 years ago, that really is not the way we're writing software now at scale. Scale is also usually never taught in school, is to deal with massive amounts of scale. And if there's anything I've learned about .NET, is that .NET and Java, man, we're the workhorses of scale. We have to deal with a lot of programs that have a lot of data that run through us, right? So those things you kind of learn a little bit on the road, but also with mentorship. So getting a mentor right away is probably even more important, I think. If you can at least just watching somebody kind of doing what they're doing, or going to your meetup group and talking that way, will give you a sense of what you should be studying.
That's a good point. I've told some high schoolers to go find the local .NET user groups, or just even any kind of software related group nearby, just to start mingling with professionals, mingling with people who do it to make a living, instead of just staying in academia. I have a high school daughter, and even thinking about, man, am I pushing her to go through a 4-year university, or am I even entertaining that? And it seems like as an industry, we're in this limbo weird place as to what is the best course 80% of the time.
The question is, have we gotten to the point where software is an art? Because if you go to culinary school, there are traditional ways in which you learn French style of preparing food, or Italian, certain kinds of techniques. We are such a young industry. I don't think we've gotten there yet. That means what is coming out has not been ingested by the traditional educational system all the way. And what we're building now is not what you're learning in school. Even when I went to boot camp, which I still felt like they prepared me for being hireable right away, which is nice. They still weren't as up to snuff as what the industry was doing, but they were probably about a year behind, which is really good compared to the traditional ones, because they have to go through so many levels of review, and you have to get separate books. This wasn't any of that. This was like, okay, we know that these are the kinds of programs you're going to need to write, and this is why you need to write them. So let's just write a bunch of them, and we'll show you what they all mean as we go. And that worked well for me, but it doesn't work well for somebody who wants to do advanced data science, maybe, or somebody, again, who maybe wants to work on creating their own algorithms. What you'll find is that there are levels. If you want to help shape a language, like you want to help write F#, maybe you should go into something that's more advanced, with advanced meaning formalized training so that you are trusted. I don't know that it should be that way, as we are literally inventing the tech every year, but
Well, probably advanced mathematics for those.
Yeah, but here's the deal. Like, I'm not great at math, but I don't have to be, because we have excellent built-in libraries in .NET to do that for me. And so I just need to understand the basic question that I'm asking for, and then vet it from there. So it depends on what layer you want to be. If you really want to invent a completely new way of doing something, oftentimes those people stay at those universities and write papers about this new thing. But when you think about people in tech, you usually think about somebody working for Amazon or something like that. It is just not necessary. In fact, almost all of them have dropped their college degree requirement, because it isn't about what you learned there. It really is about, well, what have you done on your own, and are you a self-starter? And they want to see that, because everything they're going to throw at you, you've never seen before. So it's just, can you solve some basic problems? Yes or no? There are things you can learn about how to take coding tests, which I think are just absolute ridiculousness. I think that those need to go away. And like, again, unless you're going to be creating an algorithm from scratch, I just don't think that's a good indication that you would be able to put a website or a mobile app together using libraries. Like, I just don't think that's the same question that you're asking people to solve.
Well, as we kind of get to the end of our time here, let me ask you to make a prediction. You've mentioned, software, it's not an art, but and you mentioned that the industry is kind of immature. And certainly we've seen, I guess, the electrical industry has gotten mature over people arguing over alternating current versus direct current and how to wire a building and how to build a bridge that won't just fall down after some. So fast forward and our industry gets mature. Where do you think it's going to end up? Do you think it's going to end up like so many others, like the mechanical engineering field, electrical, even plumbing, welding, lawyer, doctor with levels of regulation, professional versus, doctor and nurse? And where do you think, once it is matured, what are the elements that are going to fall in line just like a lot of other fields? And are there any elements that you think are just absolutely totally unique that are not going to be like anything else?
I think it will probably fall into a couple of camps. I think there will always be the bleeding edge technologists that want to try and create something new, and they don't want to have to be bound by certain things. But as we've proven with some of the software that has come out recently for crypto, regulations coming whether we like it or not. And it's something you're probably going to end up having to be certified for. Kevlin Henney has an excellent prediction on this as well. If you've never heard of him, he's a fantastic keynote speaker. And he talks about the history of software engineering and how it's started, because software engineers who invent things and algorithms are not good at making something with it. They're good at creating the things so that others can take what they've built and go build things. So you have to understand where you are in that pipeline, right? What kind of developer are you? On what place? Are you laying the bricks of the house? Are you painting the house? Are you the one manufacturing the bricks? Are you the one deciding what the architecture is going to be? And that there will be levels to it. And I think the farther towards sensitive data you get, which is probably right about the midway, you might have to be regulated or certified in some way. I think that's probably coming, especially as we look at more and more of the data leaks happening and security incidents that are going around. I think eventually it will be semi-required, but I'm not saying right now. Probably within my lifetime, but not probably in the next 10 years.
Yeah, it takes a while for industries to mature. Even the way my father's an electrician, so I think about that stuff a lot. And even going through 1950s, I don't know exactly the year that we switched from screw-in fuses to actual breakers, in electrical circuits, but just huge waves where we thought, oh, this is the state of the art. And then we come by, it's like, man, why would we ever do it that way? So, but it takes time.
It does take time. And I think the best that you can do is try to take a temperature of the way things are going versus how they've been, and not forget that you probably at one point in your life will touch code that is something you've never written before and something you don't understand because you don't have the architect right there with you. So please understand, most developers go in with the best of intentions of putting together something good, and it might have been good for the time. So before you drop the judgment, that could have been you that wrote that at the time with the tools and the methodologies available to them. So I would just say, be kind when you're thinking about that. And if you really just don't understand how something works, be honest about that. And maybe it really just takes a slight adjustment or retooling instead of blowing it away and building something completely from scratch again. That's usually a lot easier for companies and governments to stomach when it comes to how do you move towards something new. Migration is the great nightmare of developers, right? Is migrating from one to the other. I mean, I wrote something on .NET 5 that's now going to be sunset sometime later this year. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're moving now again. So just keep that in mind when you look at something, is that it's possible that's the best they could have done at the time.
Yeah, always. And I would add on to that, if you're young in your career, that will be you someday. It's inevitable.
It is. It absolutely is. But this is a very exciting time to be, I think, have so many different generations here, because you get to have a wealth of information of where things are new and where things have come from and how fast we've grown. But again, it's possible that maybe you're going to have to maintain something you didn't write one day, but at least they're going to pay you for it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Awesome. Well, we'll include everything that we talked about in the show notes here, which is quite a long list at this point. So that'll be great. You can find the show notes on the website, azuredevops.show. And man, Heather, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Fascinating to talk to you again, and you're working on some really cool things. Where can people see you speak next?
Great question. I'm speaking in Portugal at NDC Porto at the end of April. And then after that in the States, I'll be at Stir Trek in Columbus, Ohio in May.
Fantastic. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure getting together again.
Oh, my pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.